If my son had opened his eyes 1 second later, I might have spent the rest of my life pretending his father never existed. The first thing Ethan Miller heard was rain against the hospital window, soft and steady, like fingertips tapping on glass. The second thing he heard was the thin, furious cry of his newborn son. For 9 long months, Ethan had imagined that sound. He had carried it through double shifts at the bakery, through sleepless nights in a one-room apartment above a laundromat, through every whispered judgment from strangers who saw an unmarked Omega with no Alpha beside him and decided they knew the whole story. He had told himself that when the baby finally came, nothing else would matter. Not the fear, not the loneliness, not the name he had buried so deep in his heart that even thinking it felt like touching a scar. Nathaniel Sterling, the Alpha CEO with silver eyes, a voice like winter, and enough money to erase people without ever looking back. Ethan had tried to erase him too. He had changed cities, changed jobs, changed his phone number, even stopped using the perfume his mother said made him smell like spring rain. But there were some things a person could not outrun, and now one of them was crying in a nurse's arms, wrapped in a pale blue blanket under the bright lights of a delivery room in Havenbrook, Vermont. "Congratulations," the nurse said gently, smiling as she stepped closer. "He's perfect." Ethan was too exhausted to answer. His hair clung damply to his forehead, his hands trembled against the white sheet, and every inch of him felt hollowed out and remade. Still, when the nurse lowered the baby into his arms, something inside him went painfully still. The little boy was warm, impossibly small, no heavier than a loaf of bread from the bakery ovens Ethan opened every morning before sunrise. His tiny fists curled against his chest. His mouth quivered. Ethan laughed once, a broken sound that turned into a sob before it reached the air. "Hi," he whispered, brushing one shaking finger along the baby's cheek. "Hi, Noah." The baby quieted at the sound of his voice. For one beautiful second, the world became simple. Ethan was not a poor Omega hiding from a powerful Alpha. He was not a secret. He was not a mistake wrapped in paperwork and hush money. He was just a father holding his son for the first time. Then Noah opened his eyes. Ethan stopped breathing. They were not brown like his. They were not hazel like his mother's. They were silver, pale and clear, shining beneath the hospital lights like moonlight caught in broken glass. Ethan knew those eyes. He had seen them once across a ballroom full of millionaires, cold enough to make every Alpha in the room lower their voice. He had seen them again the morning after, reflected in the memory he had spent months trying to bury. Nathaniel Sterling's eyes. The nurse's smile faded slightly when Ethan did not speak. "Mr. Miller? Are you okay?" Ethan pulled Noah closer, as if the whole world had suddenly leaned toward them. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it over the rain, over the machines, over the soft squeak of shoes in the hallway. The secret he had built his life around had just opened its eyes and looked straight at him. He had thought he could protect his son by keeping Nathaniel Sterling's name out of their lives. But how was he supposed to hide a child who carried his father's face like a sunrise no curtain could block? Ethan pressed his lips to Noah's forehead and closed his eyes, fighting the tears that burned behind them. "I'm sorry," he whispered so softly no one else could hear. "I'm so sorry, baby. Your father was never supposed to know about us." Outside the room, the rain kept falling over Havenbrook, washing the streets silver under the hospital lamps. And on the small television mounted in the corner, muted but glowing, a news banner crawled across the bottom of the screen. Sterling Global announces major expansion into Vermont this spring. 6 months before Noah opened his silver eyes under the lights of Havenbrook General, Ethan Miller was standing behind a champagne station on the 32nd floor of the Sterling Tower in Manhattan, trying to make himself invisible. The ballroom was larger than the entire grocery store back in the neighborhood where he grew up, with glass walls that showed the city glittering below like spilled diamonds. Women in designer gowns moved beneath chandeliers that looked like frozen rain. Men in tailored suits spoke in low voices about mergers, elections, and numbers so large Ethan could not imagine them as real money. He was there because the catering company paid $26 an hour for private corporate events, and his mother's prescriptions were due on Monday. That was the only reason. Ethan kept his head down, refilled glasses, smiled when spoken to, and pressed 2 fingers against the scent-suppressant patch hidden under the cuff of his white shirt every few minutes. It had been peeling at the edge since the subway ride uptown. He could feel the cheap adhesive loosening against his skin, and each time the room filled with another wave of alpha pheromones, his stomach tightened. An unclaimed omega at a billionaire's gala was not in danger because people were monsters. Sometimes danger was quieter than that. Sometimes it was curiosity, entitlement, a hand resting too long at the small of his back, a smile that treated no as a temporary inconvenience. Ethan had learned to avoid all of it. Then Nathaniel Sterling entered the room, and even the alphas went still. He did not walk loudly. He did not need to. The crowd simply shifted around him as if his presence had gravity. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so perfectly fitted it seemed less worn than carved onto him, his silver eyes unreadable beneath dark lashes. Ethan had seen photographs of him in business magazines left behind at coffee shops, but photographs had not captured the cold pressure of him, the quiet certainty that every room he entered already belonged to him. His scent reached Ethan a moment later, clean and sharp, like cedarwood in snow, and Ethan's fingers slipped against the tray he was carrying. Nathaniel's gaze moved across the ballroom with polite disinterest until, for one impossible second, it stopped on Ethan. Nothing happened. No music swelled. No one gasped. But Ethan felt the look like a match struck in a dark room. He looked away first, cheeks burning, furious at himself for reacting to a man who would never remember his face. The night should have ended there. It should have been a foolish, embarrassing moment he could laugh about years later. Instead, just before midnight, while Ethan was carrying empty glasses toward the service hallway, the edge of his suppressant patch lifted completely. Heat rushed through him so suddenly that the hallway lights blurred. His natural scent broke free in a soft, panicked wave, sweet rain and white clover cutting through the sterile air. Ethan froze. Somewhere behind him, conversation faltered. He did not wait to see who noticed. He turned and hurried down the service corridor, one hand clamped over his wrist as if he could hold himself together by force. He found an empty conference room at the end of the hall and slipped inside, locking the door with shaking fingers. For several minutes, he stood in the dark, breathing hard, telling himself he could fix it. He had spare medical tape in his bag. He just needed to get downstairs, reach the locker area, and disappear before anyone connected his face to his scent. Then a voice spoke from the other side of the door, low and controlled. "Open the door." Ethan went cold. "Please go away," he said, hating how small he sounded. A pause. Then the voice came again, softer this time. "You are not safe out there." Ethan knew that voice. Everyone in the building knew that voice. Nathaniel Sterling was standing in the hallway outside the room, and Ethan's life, though he did not know it yet, had just split cleanly in two. For a moment, Ethan did not move. His hand stayed locked around the doorknob, his palms slick with sweat, while Nathaniel Sterling waited on the other side, as if the entire building had paused for his answer. Ethan should have refused. He should have called his supervisor, or the catering manager, or anyone whose name did not appear on the side of the tower in letters of steel and light. But beyond the locked door, he could hear footsteps slowing in the corridor. Curious voices. Alpha voices. His exposed scent had already traveled farther than he wanted to imagine. So he opened the door just wide enough to see Nathaniel standing beneath the recessed lights, his silver eyes colder than the Manhattan skyline behind him. He did not reach for Ethan. He did not crowd him. He simply removed his suit jacket and held it out. "Put this on," he said. "It will cover enough of your scent to get you upstairs." Ethan stared at the jacket like it was a trap. "Why would you help me?" Nathaniel's expression did not change, but his gaze flicked once toward the bend in the hallway, where two men had stopped pretending not to watch. "Because you said go away, and they did not." The answer was so calm, so stripped of charm, that Ethan believed it before he wanted to. He took the jacket with shaking hands. It was warm from Nathaniel's body and carried that clean winter scent so strongly that Ethan almost lost his balance. Nathaniel turned his head slightly, giving him privacy as Ethan pulled it around his shoulders. The fabric swallowed him, expensive and heavy, the sleeves falling past his fingers. Then Nathaniel stepped beside him, not touching, but close enough that the curious men immediately lowered their eyes and continued down the hall. In the private elevator, Ethan stood in the far corner and tried to breathe through the storm inside his chest. Nathaniel pressed a keycard against the panel, and the elevator rose without stopping. I have medical staff on call, he said. They can bring a stabilizer. Ethan shook his head too quickly. No. No hospital. No company doctors. I cannot have this reported. Nathaniel looked at him then, really looked, and Ethan felt seen in a way that was almost worse than being ignored. You are afraid of losing your job. Ethan laughed once, thin and humorless. I am afraid of losing everything. The elevator opened into a penthouse level that looked more like a museum than a home, all white marble, dark glass, and quiet city lights. Nathaniel led him to a sitting room and placed a glass of cold water on the table before stepping back. He kept distance between them with visible effort, his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tight. Call someone you trust, he said. Ethan thought of his mother asleep in a Queens apartment with an oxygen machine humming beside her bed. He thought of the overdue rent notice folded in his backpack. He thought of how alone he was. There is no one, he whispered. Something shifted in Nathaniel's face, not softness exactly, but recognition. As if loneliness was a language he understood fluently. The next hours became a blur of rain against the glass, city lights trembling below, and Nathaniel's voice staying low and steady whenever panic threatened to pull Ethan under. He never made promises. He never pretended the world was kind. He simply stayed. He asked before every step closer. He listened when Ethan said yes. He stopped when Ethan needed air. And when the night finally folded around them, it did not feel like a fairy tale or a business transaction. It felt like two lonely people surviving a storm neither of them had chosen. By dawn, Ethan woke under a gray sky in a bed too large for one person, wearing a soft white shirt that was not his. For a few seconds, he remembered only warmth, safety, and silver eyes watching him like he mattered. Then he turned his head and saw the other side of the bed was empty. The city beyond the windows was waking up, bright and indifferent. On the nightstand sat a sealed white envelope with his full legal name printed across the front. The envelope looked harmless, almost elegant, the kind of thing that belonged with embossed invitations and private bank statements, not with a trembling Omega sitting alone in a billionaire's bed before sunrise. Ethan stared at his name for a long time before he touched it. His fingers felt clumsy as he opened the flap and pulled out the papers inside. The first page was a non-disclosure agreement printed on thick cream paper, full of legal language that made his tired mind blur. The second was a cashier's check for $50,000. For a few seconds, Ethan did not understand what he was seeing. Then the meaning arrived all at once, cold and clean as a glass of water thrown in his face. Sterling Global appreciated his discretion. Sterling Global required his silence. Sterling Global expected him to forget what had happened in that room, as if his body were a conference schedule that could be cleared by morning. There was no note in Nathaniel's handwriting. No explanation. No apology. Just money, paper, and the quiet cruelty of being handled by people who assumed everyone had a price. Ethan pressed one hand to his mouth, but no sound came out. The warmth he remembered from the night before twisted into something humiliating. He thought of Nathaniel asking before he came closer. He thought of that steady voice telling him he was safe. He thought of silver eyes in the dark, watching him not like a problem, but like a person. Had all of that been part of the same polished machine? A soft knock came at the door. Before Ethan could answer, a woman in a charcoal suit stepped inside with a tablet tucked beneath one arm. She was in her 40s, composed and sharp, with her hair pinned into a knot so perfect it looked permanent. "Mr. Miller," she said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "My name is Claudia Reeves. I manage sensitive matters for Mr. Sterling." Ethan pulled the sheet higher around himself. "Where is he?" Mr. Sterling was called into an emergency board meeting. Her answer was smooth, practiced, empty. He asked that this be handled efficiently. The words landed harder than anger would have. Ethan looked down at the check again. $50,000. Enough to pay his mother's medical bills for months. Enough to cover the rent they were already behind on. Enough to stop the collection calls that made her hands shake every time the phone rang. Claudia placed a pen on the nightstand beside the agreement. "Once you sign, a car will take you wherever you wish to go. Your employment record from last night will be cleared. No one from the catering company will ask questions. And if I do not sign?" Ethan asked. Claudia's face remained still. "Then people will ask many questions." Ethan understood. Not a threat, not exactly. Just reality wearing a tailored suit. He looked toward the windows, where Manhattan was turning gold at the edges. Somewhere below, millions of people were waking up to ordinary problems. Burned toast, late trains, bad weather. Ethan would have given anything for an ordinary problem. He signed his name because pride did not buy medicine. He signed because his mother could not breathe without a machine that insurance always found a reason to delay. He signed because powerful people had already decided what he was, and he was too exhausted to argue with a skyscraper. Claudia took the papers, slid the check into a smaller envelope, and set a black coat over the chair. The car is waiting downstairs. Ethan dressed in silence. Nathaniel's white shirt smelled faintly of cedarwood and snow, so Ethan folded it carefully and left it on the bed as if returning evidence of a dream. He kept his own uniform, wrinkled and stained from the long night, because that was what he had come in wearing, and that was what he deserved to leave in. The private elevator carried him down without stopping. In the lobby, no one looked at him. Outside, a black car waited at the curb, its windows dark against the morning traffic. Ethan did not look back at Sterling Tower. He told himself he would forget Nathaniel Sterling. He told himself that one night could not change a life forever. 2 months later, in the fluorescent bathroom of a 24-hour pharmacy in Queens, Ethan stared at 2 pink lines and realized the money had not erased anything. Ethan did not cry in the pharmacy bathroom. He sat on the closed toilet seat with the pregnancy test balanced across his palm, the harsh fluorescent light buzzing above him, and felt his whole life become silent. Outside the thin door, someone was washing their hands. A child laughed near the greeting card aisle. The automatic doors opened and closed with a mechanical sigh, letting in the distant sound of traffic on Queens Boulevard. The world continued as if nothing had happened, as if 2 pink lines had not just turned Ethan Miller from a person trying to survive into a person responsible for a future. His first thought was Nathaniel. It came so fast, so sharp, that he hated himself for it. He pictured the silver eyes, the winter scent, the steady hands that had treated him gently in the dark. Then he pictured the envelope, the check, Claudia Reeves standing beside the bed like a polite executioner, and the thought died in his throat. Nathaniel Sterling had paid for silence. Ethan would give him silence. By the end of that week, he had quit the catering company, changed his phone number, and told his mother they needed to leave the city for cleaner air and cheaper rent. She did not ask too many questions. Margaret Miller had spent years learning how to recognize pain her son was not ready to name. She simply folded her sweaters, packed her medication, and said Vermont sounded peaceful. Havenbrook was the kind of town Ethan had only seen on postcards, with maple trees along the sidewalks, brick storefronts on Main Street, and mountains rising blue in the distance. In New York, nobody looked twice if someone cried on the subway. In Havenbrook, people noticed everything, but they also brought casseroles, remembered birthdays, and shoveled your steps after a snowstorm without being asked. Ethan found work at Rose Hill Bakery 3 days after arriving. The owner, Mrs. Callahan, was a round-faced beta woman with flour on her sleeves and kindness hidden beneath a voice that sounded permanently annoyed. "I pay $18 an hour. Mornings start at 4:30, and if you burn my cinnamon rolls, I will haunt you," she said. Ethan accepted before she finished the sentence. The months that followed were measured in dough rising, snow falling, and doctor appointments paid for in cash. Ethan grew round beneath oversized sweaters. He learned to sleep on his side, to keep crackers beside the bed, to smile when customers asked where the alpha was and pretend he had not heard them. Some days were almost peaceful. He liked the quiet rhythm of the bakery before sunrise, the ovens glowing warm against the dark windows, the smell of sugar and yeast wrapping around him like something safe. Other days, fear sat beside him like a second shadow. He worried about money, about medical bills, about whether he could be enough for a child who had never asked to be born into secrecy. At night, when his mother slept and the apartment above the bakery settled into creaks and old pipe whispers, Ethan took the sealed non-disclosure agreement from the bottom drawer of his dresser. He read the sentence that had carved itself into his memory. All parties agree to no further contact regarding the events of that evening. He would touch the place where his stomach curved beneath his shirt and wonder if a baby could inherit rejection before birth. The first time the child kicked, Ethan was kneading sourdough at the bakery table. He gasped, both hands flying to his belly. Mrs. Callahan looked up from glazing lemon bars. "Everything all right?" Ethan nodded, but tears blurred the flour-dusted counter. "He moved," he whispered. The word he came out before any doctor had confirmed it, before any ultrasound technician smiled and said, "Son." Somehow Ethan already knew. Mrs. Callahan softened, walking over to place one warm hand over his. "Then you tell that little boy he has work to do. We need someone around here with better taste in music." Ethan laughed through the tears, and for the first time since Manhattan, the sound did not hurt. He named the baby Noah because it meant rest, and because Ethan wanted his son to have a name that sounded like safe ground after a flood. He promised Noah everything in whispers. Fresh air, warm blankets, pancakes on Sundays, a life where no one could buy his silence. But every promise had a shadow. Sometimes, when Ethan caught his reflection in the bakery window after closing, he saw not himself but the outline of a secret growing too large to hide. And when Havenbrook General called to confirm his delivery date, Ethan placed one hand over his belly and whispered, "It is just us, baby. It has always been just us." He believed it until the night Noah was born and opened his silver eyes. The morning after Noah was born, Ethan watched the news banner crawl across the muted television until the words stopped looking real. Sterling Global announces major expansion into Vermont this spring. He was still holding Noah against his chest, the baby wrapped in a blue hospital blanket, breathing in soft little sighs as if he had not just shattered every wall Ethan had built. Nathaniel Sterling was coming to Vermont. Not someday, not in some distant business article Ethan could ignore, but here, close enough for the name Sterling to appear on local news beneath a map of streets Ethan walked every week. Havenbrook was not Manhattan. It had one hospital, 2 elementary schools, 3 grocery stores, and a downtown where people still waved from pickup trucks. A man like Nathaniel did not simply pass through a place like this. He arrived, and everyone noticed. Ethan looked down at Noah's face and felt fear coil under his ribs. The silver eyes were closed now, hidden beneath delicate lashes, but Ethan had already seen them. So had the nurse. So had the doctor, who paused for half a second too long before smiling and saying the baby was beautiful. By noon, Margaret Miller arrived with a knitted blanket and tears in her eyes. Ethan's mother moved slowly, one hand gripping her portable oxygen bag, but when she saw Noah, her whole face lit with a kind of joy Ethan had not seen in years. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, lowering herself into the chair beside the bed. "He is an angel." Ethan tried to smile. Margaret reached for the baby, and Ethan placed Noah carefully in her arms. For a few quiet seconds, there was only the soft rustle of the blanket and Margaret's trembling breath. Then Noah stirred and opened his eyes. Margaret went still. Ethan saw the recognition move across her face like a shadow passing over snow. She knew. Of course she knew. Ethan had never told her Nathaniel's name, but months of silence had not made him invisible. "Ethan," she said softly. He looked away. "Please do not ask." Margaret held Noah closer, her expression folding into pain rather than judgment. "I was only going to ask if you were safe." That broke something small in him. Not enough to cry, because he had used up all his tears during the night, but enough to make his voice rough when he answered. "I think I was. I do not know anymore." After they were discharged, life became smaller and harder and more beautiful than Ethan had imagined. Noah cried at 2 in the morning, then 4, then 6. He slept best against Ethan's chest, one tiny fist curled in his shirt. Mrs. Callahan left soup at the apartment door and refused to accept payment. Margaret sang old lullabies in a voice made thin by illness, but warm with love. For a while, Ethan convinced himself the world could remain contained inside that apartment above Rosehill Bakery. Then spring came early, melting the snow along Main Street, and Sterling Global signs appeared on the old paper mill at the edge of town. Men in hard hats measured sidewalks. Surveyors placed orange flags in empty lots. Local newspapers ran photographs of Nathaniel Sterling shaking hands with the mayor beneath headlines about jobs, investment, and revitalization. Ethan avoided every article. He turned off the television whenever Sterling Global was mentioned. But he could not turn off the town. Customers talked while buying coffee. Mrs. Callahan muttered that big companies always promised more than they gave. Teenagers took selfies outside the construction fence. And every time Ethan carried Noah downstairs in the morning, he felt as if the distance between their quiet life and Nathaniel Sterling was shrinking by inches. 1 year passed that way, marked by Noah's first smile, his first tooth, his first wobbly crawl across the bakery floor, while Mrs. Callahan pretended not to spoil him with bits of soft dinner roll. Ethan became good at hiding. He wore his hair shorter. He used Miller, never any other name. He kept Noah away from cameras during town events. He told himself it was enough. Then, on a cold November morning, the bell above Rose Hill Bakery's front door chimed at exactly 7:15. Ethan was behind the counter, tying a box of maple scones with brown string. Noah playing on a blanket near the pastry case with a wooden spoon in one hand. The air smelled of coffee, cinnamon, and warm butter. Ethan looked up with his customer smile already in place. The smile died before it reached his eyes. Nathaniel Sterling stood in the doorway wearing a charcoal overcoat dusted with snow, taller and colder than memory, his silver eyes moving over the bakery as if searching for something he did not yet understand. For one suspended second, neither of them spoke. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. Nathaniel's gaze landed on him, narrowed slightly, and filled with a strange, distant recognition. Then Noah laughed, dropped the wooden spoon, and crawled toward the counter. Nathaniel looked down. The baby lifted his face. Silver met silver. The bakery went silent. For one suspended second, Nathaniel Sterling looked at Noah as if the child had stepped out of a memory he had never been allowed to keep. The bakery around him blurred into warm gold light, glass cases, powdered sugar, and the low hiss of the espresso machine, but the baby's eyes remained painfully clear. Silver. Not gray, not blue, not a trick of the morning sun on the window. Silver, the rare sterling color that had followed Nathaniel through childhood portraits, society pages, and every boardroom where people learned to read his silence as power. Noah sat on the floor beside the counter, one hand pressed against the polished wood, his round face tilted up in open curiosity. Then he smiled. It was a small, delighted smile, the kind babies gave freely before the world taught them caution, and Nathaniel's expression cracked so briefly Ethan might have imagined it. Ethan moved first. He came around the counter too quickly, scooping Noah into his arms and holding him against his chest. "Mrs. Callahan," he called, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need you up front." From the kitchen, a tray clattered. "I am elbow-deep in dough. What happened?" she shouted, but Ethan barely heard her. Nathaniel's eyes had shifted from Noah to him, and now recognition was sharpening there, cutting through time, through the changed haircut, through the flour on Ethan's sleeves, and the exhaustion carved beneath his eyes. "You," Nathaniel said softly. Not accusing, not warm, just stunned. Ethan lifted his chin. "Can I get you something, Mr. Sterling?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened at the formal name. "You know who I am. Everyone in town knows who you are." "That is not what I meant." Noah reached toward the shiny buttons on Nathaniel's coat, babbling a sound that made Ethan's arms tighten. Nathaniel watched the movement, his face losing another shade of color. "How old is he?" Ethan felt the question like a hand around his throat. "That is not your business." Nathaniel looked at him then, fully, and the cold executive mask settled back into place, but Ethan could see the fracture beneath it. "His eyes make it my business." Heat rose in Ethan's face, sharp with fear and anger. "No, his life makes it mine." Mrs. Callahan appeared from the kitchen, wiping floury hands on her apron. She took one look at Ethan's face, then at Nathaniel, then at Noah, and her usual sarcasm vanished. "Ethan," she said carefully, "do you need me to take the baby?" "No," Ethan answered too fast. Noah startled at the tension and pressed his face into Ethan's shoulder with a soft whimper. That tiny sound changed the air. Nathaniel took one step back instead of forward, as if forcing himself not to frighten the child. The restraint hurt Ethan more than aggression would have. It reminded him of the night in Manhattan, of distance kept with visible effort, of a man who had once seemed careful before the envelope taught Ethan caution was just another kind of performance. Nathaniel lowered his voice. "I want to speak with you privately." Ethan laughed once, quiet and bitter. "You had your chance to speak." Nathaniel's brows drew together. "What does that mean?" Ethan almost said it there, in the middle of the bakery, with Mrs. Callahan standing guard and 3 customers pretending not to listen from a corner table. He almost threw the words at Nathaniel like broken glass. "You paid me to disappear. You left me a check where an apology should have been. You made our son a secret before he had a heartbeat." But Noah shifted in his arms, warm and trusting, and Ethan swallowed the fire because his son deserved better than a public scene before breakfast. It means I am working, he said, and you are blocking the door. Nathaniel did not move. Snow melted slowly on the shoulders of his overcoat. His silver eyes returned to Noah, and something ancient and aching passed through them. What is his name? Ethan wanted to lie. He wanted to say any name except the one he had whispered through lonely nights and first fevers and morning lullabies. But Noah was not a lie. He never had been. Noah, Ethan said. Nathaniel repeated it under his breath, as if the single word had weight. Noah. The baby turned at the sound, peeking from Ethan's shoulder. For a heartbeat, father and son simply looked at each other. Then Noah smiled again, and Nathaniel Sterling, the man who could purchase buildings and silence rooms, looked completely lost. Ethan stepped back behind the counter, putting wood and glass between them. Please leave, he said, and this time his voice shook. Nathaniel heard it. Ethan saw that he heard it. Whatever question he had been about to ask died behind his teeth. He reached into his coat, removed a white business card, and placed it on the counter without pushing it toward Ethan. I am staying at the Hawthorne Inn, he said. I will not approach the child without your permission. Ethan stared at the card as if it might burn through the counter. How generous. Pain flickered across Nathaniel's face, gone almost immediately. But I will need answers. Ethan met his eyes. So did I. The words landed between them heavier than anything else spoken that morning. Nathaniel went still. Behind Ethan, the ovens clicked, the coffee machine sighed, and Noah's tiny hand curled in the collar of Ethan's shirt. Nathaniel looked from Ethan to the baby one last time, then turned and walked back into the snowy morning. The bell above the door chimed behind him, bright and ordinary, as if Ethan's life had not just cracked open for the second time. For the rest of that day, Ethan moved like someone walking through a house after an earthquake, recognizing every room but no longer trusting the floor. He fed Noah, changed Noah, rocked Noah through his afternoon nap, and helped Mrs. Callahan close the bakery before sunset, but a part of him remained fixed on the white business card lying untouched beside the cash register. Nathaniel Sterling. Hawthorne Inn. A phone number printed in black ink, so crisp it looked carved rather than written. Ethan told himself he would throw it away. He told himself powerful men did not deserve explanations after buying silence. But when he carried Noah upstairs that evening and opened the bottom drawer of his dresser, the old cream-colored agreement seemed to stare back at him like a ghost waiting to be named. His mother watched from the rocking chair near the window, her oxygen machine humming softly beside her. Secrets get heavier when children start growing around them, Margaret said. Ethan closed his eyes. He does not get to walk in and act wounded. No, she said gently. But you deserve to say what he did to you while he is looking at your face. By 8 o'clock, Noah was asleep in Margaret's arms, and Ethan was walking through light snow toward the Hawthorne Inn with the agreement folded inside his coat. The inn sat at the edge of Main Street, all white columns, green shutters, and golden windows glowing against the dark. Nathaniel was waiting in the lobby before Ethan gave his name, standing beside the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back. He looked too large for the room, too polished for the braided rugs and framed photographs of covered bridges. When he saw Ethan, relief moved across his face before he buried it. Thank you for coming. Ethan did not sit when Nathaniel led him into a private parlor. He took the folded papers from his coat and placed them on the coffee table. There are your answers. Nathaniel looked down. For the first time since Ethan had known him, true confusion crossed his face. He picked up the agreement, read the first page, then the second. The color drained slowly from his skin. Where did you get this? Ethan gave a short, disbelieving laugh. From your manager, Claudia Reeves. In your penthouse. The morning after you decided I was worth $50,000 and not one conversation. Nathaniel's head lifted. I never gave this to you. The words were so immediate, so quiet, that Ethan almost hated him for how much they sounded like the truth. Do not. His voice cracked, but he forced it steady. Do not stand there and insult me with that. Nathaniel turned another page, his eyes moving faster now, sharper, colder. This is my electronic authorization code, but I did not issue it. Claudia was dismissed 8 months ago for misusing executive access during a board dispute. Ethan's anger faltered for half a breath, then returned even hotter because confusion was more dangerous than hatred. Convenient. Nathaniel set the papers down as if they were fragile and poisonous. I woke that morning in a conference suite 2 floors below my residence. I was told you had already left. I was told you demanded payment through staff and refused further contact. Ethan stared at him. The room was warm from the fire, but his hands had gone cold. That is a lie. I know that now. No, Ethan said, stepping back. You do not get to know that now and make it clean. You do not get to blame a woman in a suit and walk away innocent. Nathaniel absorbed the words without defense, and somehow that hurt too. You are right. Ethan had expected denial. He had expected arrogance, maybe anger, maybe the polished cruelty of a man protecting his reputation. He had not expected agreement. I did not place that envelope beside you, Nathaniel said. But I believed what I was told because it was easier than admitting I wanted to find you. I let people around me turn you into a transaction because that was a language I understood. Ethan's throat tightened. I was pregnant and alone. Nathaniel's expression broke, not dramatically, not loudly, but in the quiet way ice gives beneath too much weight. I did not know. I know, Ethan whispered. That is the worst part. You did not know because you did not ask. Silence filled the parlor, broken only by the soft pop of wood in the fireplace. Outside, snow drifted past the window like torn paper. Nathaniel looked down at the agreement again, then at Ethan. What do you want from me? Ethan thought of Noah asleep against Margaret's shoulder, Noah laughing at the bakery, Noah's silver eyes meeting Nathaniel's as if the world had finally shown him a missing piece. Nothing you can buy, Ethan said. No lawyers. No threats. No custody games. If you want to know him, you start by proving you can respect me. Nathaniel nodded once. Then that is where I will start. Ethan picked up the agreement, tore it cleanly in half, and let the pieces fall onto the coffee table between them. It did not fix the past. It did not erase the check, the fear, the lonely months, or the first year Nathaniel had missed. But for the first time since Manhattan, the paper no longer felt like a chain around Ethan's throat. 3 nights after Ethan tore the agreement in half, Noah developed a fever just after midnight. It began quietly, with a restless whimper against Ethan's shoulder and tiny hands curling weakly into his shirt. But within an hour, Noah's cheeks were flushed and his silver eyes kept fluttering open without truly focusing. Ethan drove to Havenbrook General with Margaret beside him, the winter roads shining under the headlights and his heart beating so hard he could barely hear the tires over the wet pavement. The pediatrician on duty checked Noah carefully, then asked questions about family history, alpha lineage, and pheromone sensitivity with a gentleness that made Ethan more frightened, not less. He is not in immediate danger, she said, but his system is overwhelmed. Some children with strong alpha inheritance stabilize faster with the biological alpha parent nearby. Ethan stood in the pale hospital room, holding his son while the words settled around him. For one terrible second, pride and fear fought inside him. Then Noah made a small, broken sound, and Ethan reached for his phone. Nathaniel answered before the first ring finished. Ethan, Noah is sick, Ethan said, and his voice finally cracked. Havenbrook General. Nathaniel did not ask for proof. He did not ask what it meant for him. He only said, I am coming. Less than 15 minutes later, he appeared in the doorway wearing a wool coat over yesterday's shirt, snow melting in his hair, breath uneven as if he had run from the parking lot. He stopped just inside the room and looked at Ethan for permission, not at the doctor, not at Margaret, not at the machines, but at Ethan. That mattered. It should not have, but it did. Ethan nodded once. Nathaniel crossed the room slowly and held out his arms. Noah stirred before Ethan even passed him over, his little face turning toward Nathaniel's scent. The moment Nathaniel held him, the air changed. The sharp, frightened edge of Noah's crying softened. Nathaniel lowered into the chair beside the bed, cradling the baby with a care so careful it was almost painful to watch. His silver eyes shone under the fluorescent lights, fixed on the child who shared them. Hello, Noah, he whispered. I am here. I am sorry I was late. Ethan turned toward the window because the tears came too fast to hide. Behind him, Nathaniel began humming, awkward and quiet, a melody that had no polish and no power in it, only fear and wonder and a kind of love learning how to speak. By morning, Noah's fever had broken. He slept between them in the hospital bassinet, one tiny hand wrapped around Nathaniel's finger and the other resting against Ethan's palm. When the doctor said they could go home by afternoon, Nathaniel did not smile like a man who had won something. He looked relieved, then tired, then humbled. In the quiet that followed, he placed a folder on the windowsill. Ethan stiffened. Nathaniel noticed immediately and stepped back. "It is not a demand," he said. "It is not a contract for you to sign." Ethan opened the folder slowly. Inside was a voluntary acknowledgement of parentage, already signed by Nathaniel, leaving Ethan's section blank. There was also a legal statement giving Ethan full residential custody unless Ethan chose otherwise, a trust for Noah's medical care and education, and a letter addressed to Rose Hill Bakery confirming that Sterling Global would not buy, pressure, or interfere with the property or anyone connected to it. Ethan read every page twice. "You could fight me," he said softly. Nathaniel's face tightened. "I could, and if I did, I would become the man you had every reason to fear." Ethan looked at Noah, sleeping peacefully beneath the blue blanket from his first day in the world. "What do you want?" Nathaniel's answer was quiet. "To earn a place, not take one." Trust did not return in a single morning. Forgiveness did not arrive like sunlight through hospital blinds. It came slowly, over weeks and then months, in ordinary moments that nobody would have printed in a business magazine. Nathaniel learned how to warm a bottle and how to fold a stroller with one hand. He sat in the corner of Rose Hill Bakery with Noah on his knee while Ethan worked the morning rush. He apologized to Margaret without making excuses. He replaced Claudia Reeves's silence with a public correction inside his company, not naming Ethan, but changing the policy that had allowed someone vulnerable to be treated like a problem to bury. He came to custody meetings when asked, left when Ethan needed space, and never once used money as an answer to pain. Spring returned to Havenbrook with maple buds on the trees and sunlight spilling across Main Street. On Noah's first birthday, Mrs. Callahan closed the bakery early and made a cake shaped like a moon, frosted in pale silver and blue. Noah sat in his high chair between Ethan and Nathaniel, smashing frosting into his own curls while everyone laughed. Later, after the guests left and Margaret dozed in the rocking chair, Ethan carried Noah to the bakery window. Nathaniel stood beside them, close but not crowding, his reflection faint in the dark glass. Noah opened his silver eyes and reached one hand toward each of them. Ethan looked at Nathaniel for a long moment, not forgetting the hurt, not pretending the past had been gentle, but finally seeing the man who had stayed after the truth became difficult. "Tomorrow," Ethan said, "you can come for breakfast." Nathaniel's breath caught like the offer was greater than any empire he had ever built. "I will be here." Ethan believed him. Outside, Havenbrook slept under a soft spring rain, the same kind of rain that had tapped against the hospital window the night Noah was born. But this time, Ethan was not alone, and his son's silver eyes were no longer proof of a secret. They were proof that even a life broken by silence could grow into something honest, warm, and whole.